Hello everyone, I'm joined again with Jamie from Surrey County Council, and we're going to be talking more about tribunals, and in this video we're going to be talking about the appeal hearing and what happens after an appeal. So first of all, did you want to introduce yourself, Jamie?
Yeah, of course. Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Conran. I'm the Service Manager for Policy, Practice and Performance for Surrey County Council. And that means one of the teams that I manage and have overall responsibility for is the tribunal team.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So we've done some other videos about the process and things like this. So we're now talking about what actually happens within the hearing. So the first question is, what happens during a hearing?
Yeah, this is, a really good question. I will try and keep it concise. But as you can imagine, sometimes a lot happens in a hearing. So at the moment, the majority of hearings are virtual, overwhelming majority are virtual. And I think that that's planned to continue, certainly for the foreseeable future. So on the day of the hearing, all participants will be asked to log on to test. There's an online hearing platform, and you log on and there's a clerk there that says, testing, can you hear, can you see? And then you'll be asked to log on again 5 minutes before the hearing. So when the hearing starts, you'll see everyone on the screen. The tribunal will run through some important ground rules. For example, that you're not allowed to film, you're not allowed to record. They check that all parties are in a confidential space. They ask you to stay on mute. They tell you how to request a break. And then they outline the purpose of the tribunal, what they can and cannot make a ruling on. And then following this, the tribunal panel introduce themselves. And then each participant and witness will be invited to introduce themselves as well. Tribunal generally moves to the local authority and says, outline your position. And then they receive an update from the person that's making the appeal. So it might be from a parent. And then following this, the tribunal usually runs through the working document. So if it is a section B and F appeal, or B, F and I, so special educational needs, special educational provision, and the educational setting, they'll work through the working document almost in chronological. So start with section B and they work all the way down. And then as those progress, the relevant witnesses will be called on to give evidence on any issues that remain. For example, speech and language therapists might be asked for comments on communication interaction. An occupational therapist might be asked for comments on sensory and physical needs. And then if there's two witnesses, so you might have a speech and language therapist that works for Surrey County Council, and then you might have an independent speech and language therapist. There'll be an opportunity to almost question. It's like cross-examining, you might have heard of that before, but question each other's evidence. And then the tribunal can determine which one they favour, which one they want to lean in favour of. So witnesses give evidence as required and as appropriate. The tribunal panel might ask them questions, and they typically do so once that witness has given their evidence. And then once all of the evidence is heard, each party, so you've got the local authority and then you've got the parent or a legal representative that the parent has employed, will be invited to give a final submission to the tribunal. And the local authority goes first, and then it's the person that's making the appeal. If the hearing's listed for a full day, there's usually about 3 breaks. So 2 short breaks of 15 to 20 minutes in the mid-morning and afternoon, and 1 longer break for lunch. If you require further breaks, though, you can always ask the tribunal. So that is a whistle-stop tour of what happens during a hearing.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like it's so much to cover, isn't it? In one question. That's really useful overview. Thank you. And so, who do the local authority bring to represent themselves?
So the local authority is represented in appeals by the tribunal officer. That will be the overwhelming majority of cases are represented by the tribunal officer. In some rare cases, the local authority might get counsel might seek instruction from representation from legal counsel. From experience, this is where maybe maybe a parent has employed a barrister. So it's very rare, and the overwhelming majority are represented by the tribunal team, tribunal officers.
Brilliant, thank you. And how long does the hearing generally last for?
So this can depend on the complexity of the case. Some last for maybe half a day, so it'll be a morning session or an afternoon session, and some can be 2 days. From experience, these tend to be extended appeals, so appeals that involve an additional health and or social care element. They tend to be more complex, and they, rather than trying to push through everything in 1 day, which can be quite exhausting, there's a lot of information, maybe there's witnesses on both sides, they give themselves 2 days to work through all of the issues that are still there to be resolved by the tribunal.
Brilliant. And in terms of finding out the outcome, do families get the outcome on the day, or when does that happen?
You might get a sense of where it's heading, but formally you don't. You won't get the outcome on the same day. So the SEND tribunal aims to let both parties know, so the person bringing the appeal and the local authority, the outcome of the hearing in 10 working days. However, in the other video that we filmed together, I referred to when it's very busy, when the tribunal is managing a lot of appeals, that can delay the process. So sometimes it can take up to 20 working days. My advice to families would be, if it's around longer than 10 working days, you still haven't heard anything, contact the SEND tribunal directly, and you quote your appeal number, and you basically where's the outcome, and they'll give you an update.
Brilliant. No, that's really helpful, thank you, because I think it's nothing worse, isn't there, when you've been through that whole process and then having to wait afterwards. It's just
the agonizing wait. And then you have to read the decision as well, and sometimes they're quite lengthy. But yeah, right at the bottom is sort of the decision. But
yeah. So that's kind of the hearing day as such, and then we've got some questions about after the hearing. So what happens if you don't, as a family, you don't get the outcome you were hoping for, and can you appeal the tribunal's decision?
Yeah, I mean, and that can be really difficult, where you've gone through that whole process that may have taken 12 weeks from start to finish, and you don't get the outcome that you were hoping for. You can appeal the decision, and after, the tribunal will issue a leaflet that basically alongside the decision that says these are your rights, in terms of how if you're not in agreement, this is what you need to do. What I would say is that the tribunal decision is only appealable if you feel that they've made an error in law. So they've either misapplied or misinterpreted the law, not because you don't agree with it. It's a really high bar, but if you feel strongly about it, you might want to seek some advice around what can I do with this this decision that I don't agree with. So yeah, you can appeal it. It will likely be tricky, but it's happened before, and they go to what's called the upper tier tribunal.
Brilliant, thank you. And how soon after a hearing should families receive the final plan, so the updated EHCP?
Yeah, so it depends on the appeal. If we're thinking sort of the most common ones, if the local authority has been ordered to name a different setting in section I, so a school setting or educational setting, it would be 2 weeks. If the local authority is amending other sections, it can be up to 5 weeks, and they're described in the SEND regulations.
Brilliant, thank you. And who can families contact at the local authority after the hearing?
So again, this depends on the query. So if it's something related to maybe the appeal hearing itself, or something maybe to clarify what's the process in relation to the tribunal or an appeal, then you could contact your tribunal officer. Generally, it would be your case officer. So the tribunal officer's role has almost ended with the conclusion of that appeal, and it goes back to business as usual with your case officer. So generally, it would be your case officer at the centre. But again, if there was any doubt in terms of if it was something that you were certain this definitely involves my tribunal officer, then you can always contact them.
Brilliant. And so obviously we've talked about when you should get the final plan, but how soon after receiving the final plan should the provision within that start being delivered?
It's a really good question. So I'm assuming we're talking about final plan, not final order. So find that the tribunal order will give the timescales that I've just talked about, in terms of you might have 2 weeks for that setting to be named. But sometimes if you're thinking about an educational setting that's been named in section I, it's highly unlikely that the next day a child would start. You would think about transition and things. So I think these will be unique to the situation. And as always, you can always ask either a tribunal officer or a SEND case officer and say, talk me through the timeline now that this decision has been made through the tribunal. And then the provision that should be starting as part of it, you'd have a clear understanding of when that will begin.
Brilliant. And what would a family do? Because we've had this, from families before. If some of the provision that's been agreed through a tribunal within a plan is not being delivered, what can they do? Yeah,
hopefully this is rare. But what I would say is contact your case officer in the first instance, and it might be helpful to specify which provision, if specify which provision you believe is not being delivered, so that they can investigate it as a priority. So as we know, if it's been agreed, through the tribunal, it must be delivered if it's in the EHC plan. So if there's any area that you as a parent or as a family are concerned that it's not being delivered, contact the case officer. They'll be able to look into it, and what they will more than likely do is liaise with the school setting. If that's, again, there's so many nuances with all of this, but if that's the type of appeal, and say, can you talk us through what are you delivering? So it will be investigated. That's going to be a situation that hopefully is rare, but I can understand will cause a lot of frustration or anxiety.
Yeah, and you've talked about obviously the case officer, following the appeal, but do families get allocated a new case officer after the final plan has been sent, and how will this be communicated to them?
Generally, unless there have been any kind of changes to the SEND team itself, that your original case officer remains. So they didn't go anywhere. It was just your main point of contact for tribunal related matters was the tribunal officer. So your case officer is still responsible for example, if there's an annual review that happens to take place that can be quite confusing, but an annual review that takes place in the middle of an appeal, your case officer still has some responsibility around that. So most of the time they won't have changed. They might still have had correspondence with you during that appeal. So it will just go back to, it's the tribunal officer that steps out, and then it goes back to business as usual.
Brilliant. And that's really nice actually to have that sort of continuity, isn't it? Because I think sometimes it can probably get quite confusing with all the different people involved in it. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
And it is it can be a confusing with who is responsible here. And I think maybe we do another video.
Yes, yes. No, I think you're probably right. But no, that's really useful, because I think that's given us a good start and you know, a good overview of what happens. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions today. And we will no doubt be doing some more recordings on this in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.